Okay. All right, so we've been talking about various biographies, people in the past. Today we're learning about Harriet Tubman. So we're going to watch a 3-minute video to introduce Harriet Tubman, and then we're going to fill out our biography worksheets that we've been working on.
Trust me when I say I know growing up when I was a kid, there were times that I got picked on by a bully at school. I remember it well because he would pick on me all the time. Every day he would talk about my glasses, talk about my clothes, and even chase me home. He made me not even want to go home. That was until one of my friends helped me out. She showed me another way to get home from school, and the bully never went that way. After taking a new path to get home, I had it easy. That story reminded me of a famous woman in African American history named Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was not only a nurse, cook, and spy, but she risked her life to help others escape slavery as a conductor of the Underground Railroad. Just like I found no secret way to get home and escape from the bully, Harriet helped slaves escape their masters and get to freedom with the Underground Railroad. Like so many other African Americans during this time, Harriet was forced into slavery. At birth, her name was Aramita Ross, but her nickname as a child was Minty. Growing up a slave, the work was hard. With so much lifting and working in the fields, it was really tough each day, but it made Harriet strong for plowing fields. At the age of 13, something bad did happen to Harriet. One day while she was out, a slave owner had got mad at his slave and threw a weight at him. Unfortunately, the weight did not hit that slave that he was mad at, but it did hit Harriet, almost killing her. After getting hurt, Harriet had bad headaches and blackouts for the rest of her life. Tired of being mistreated, in 1849, Harriet decided she could not take it anymore. She used the Underground Railroad to escape from slavery. Now, the Underground Railroad was not a real railroad. It was a series of houses leading to the north where people hid slaves trying to escape to freedom in the northern states. Slaves knew if they made it there, they could find cities that did not allow slavery, so after a dangerous trip, Harriet did that and escaped to the north. Wanting to help others, Harriet then became a conductor herself on the Underground Railroad once she got her freedom. Leading escapes from the South, Harriet received the nickname Moses after the Bible story, leading her people to freedom. During this time, the Civil War was going on. It was a fight in America between the northern states and the southern states. A big reason why they were fighting was the southern states used slaves for labor. This is where Harriet Tubman also served as a nurse, helping the wounded soldiers from the north who fought for the slaves. She was also a spy taking information back and forth to help the Union. Another interesting fact about Harriet Tubman was she was the southern state's most wanted. That's right, at one point, southern slave owners offered $40,000 for her capture. They were very upset that she would help African Americans escape slavery. Well, like I said there, Harriet Tubman was a champion for African Americans during a time when they were treated very poorly. Risking her own life for helping others, she will always be remembered in African American histories as a great woman and that lady called Moses who helped her people make their way to freedom.
Okay. So now we're going to read a book about Harriet Tubman.
Jonas, eat.
Okay.
There's another video play. Eat.
All right, a picture book of Harriet Tubman. And remember, we're going to fill in our biography. We're going to fill in our biography worksheets after we read this. Okay. Harriet Tubman was born in 1820 or 1821 on a large plantation in Dorchester County, Maryland. Although the plantation had a big house with many rooms and fine furniture, Harriet was born in a small one-room log hut far behind the big house. The hut was born and had a dirt floor, no windows, and no furniture. Harriet was the sixth of 11 children. Her father, Benjamin Ross, and her mother, were both slaves. They were owned by Edward Brodus. He owned Harriet Tubman too.
No.
The slaves worked hard all day, but they weren't paid. Harriet hated slavery. She was wild and often beaten. She was not willing to do as she was told. One time, when Harriet was hired out to work for someone else, she saw a bowl filled with lumps of sugar. She said later, "Now you know, I never had anything good. No sweet, no sugar, and that sugar right by me did look so nice." She took one lump from the bowl. Harriet's mistress, Miss Susan, saw her take it and chased her around with a whip. Harriet ran from the house and hid with the pigs. She ate potato peelings and other scraps until she was so hungry she had to go back. When she did, she was whipped again and again. Edward Brodus sold lumber, apples, wheat, and corn that grew on his plantation. Sometimes he took slaves he owned and sold them, too, down the river to plantations farther south. Harriet saw two of her sisters taken away in chains. Harriet was afraid that one day she was also going to be sold. When Harriet was a young girl, abolitionists, people against slavery, were beginning to speak out in protest. Abolitionist newspapers were being published. Nat Turner, a young slave, knew how Moses had led the Israelites from slavery into Egypt. He hoped to lead his people out of slavery too. And in 1831, he started a rebellion. Slave owners, their wives, and their children were killed. Nat Turner and others were caught and hanged. Harriet dreamed that one day a true Moses would lead her to freedom. In 1835, Harriet came between a master and a slave who was running away. The master threw a metal weight at the runaway. It hit Harriet instead and almost killed her. Harriet had a deep cut in her forehead that never fully healed, and for the next almost 80 years, Harriet suffered from severe headaches and sleeping spells. But she survived and thanked God for saving her. After the accident, she often prayed. In 1844, Harriet married John Tubman, a free man. They lived in his cabin near the Brodus plantation. Harriet was thinking about running away. She wanted John to join her, but he wouldn't. He said that if he ran off, he would tell her master, and soon the patrollers and their dogs would be after her. But Harriet had made up her mind. She started planning her escape. Slaves often sang in the fields. The afternoon before Harriet ran off, she sang too, and in the words of her song was a message to the other slaves. "When that chariot comes, I'm going to lead you. I'm bound for the promised land." For Harriet Tubman, the promised land was north, where she would be free. Harriet escaped at night with 3 of her brothers. They had no food, no money, and they didn't know where to go. Soon after they left, Harriet's brothers decided to turn back. They made Harriet go back too. 2 nights later, Harriet went off alone. "I had a right to liberty or death," she said after her escape. "If I could not have one, I would have the other." Harriet ran to the house of a white woman who had once offered to help her. The white woman told Harriet which house to go next. The people in the second house directed Harriet to another house farther north. Harriet was traveling on what she had known as the Underground Railroad. Each stop on the railroad was the house of someone who believed slavery was wrong and was willing to help runaway slaves find their way to freedom. Harriet hid during the day. She traveled at night until she reached Pennsylvania. There was a law in that state against owning slaves. Harriet Tubman was a free woman. She felt like a new person. She said later, the sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. During the years between 1850 and 1860, Harriet worked as a cook, dishwasher, and cleaning woman. She used much of the money she earned to make 19 trips south to lead about 300 slaves to freedom. Many of them were her own relatives. Harriet took them from one safe house to the next. Sometimes she led them as far as to Canada. She was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. At times, Harriet disguised herself as a weak old woman or as a man. She used songs as a secret code. When the runaways were hiding and it was safe to come out, she sang a joyful song. Hail, oh hail, ye happy spirits. The runaway slaves always recognized Harriet's deep, husky voice. One slave began their journey north with Harriet. She wouldn't let them turn back. When slaves were too scared to go on, Harriet pointed a gun at their heads and said, "You'll go on or you'll die." Years later, Harriet said proudly, "I never ran my train off the track. I never lost a passenger." Harriet was called Moses because she led her people out of slavery. There was a huge reward waiting for anyone who caught her, but no one ever did. In 1858, Harriet met John Brown, a leader in the movement to end slavery. He called her one of the best and bravest people in America. He called her General Tubman. In November 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and 11 southern states withdrew from the United States. They didn't want Lincoln, a man who hated slavery, as their leader. The war between the North and the South, the Civil War, began on April 12, 1861. During the war, Harriet Tubman worked as a nurse and a spy for the Northern Army. She went into enemy territory and led hundreds of slaves to freedom. She helped care for slaves who ran north during the fighting. In December 1865, soon after the Civil War ended, an amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed. Slavery was no longer allowed in the United States. After the war, Harriet Tubman returned to her home in Auburn, New York. John Tubman had died in 1867. In 1869, Harriet married a former slave and soldier for the Northern Army, Nelson Davis. In Auburn, she went from house to house selling vegetables. Wherever she went, she was asked to tell about her adventures on the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman helped many former slaves who came to her in Auburn. She supported the suffragist movement and the fight for the right of women to vote in the United States. Harriet helped establish a home in Auburn for sick, poor, and homeless black people. When she moved into that home in 1911, she was old and weak. "I can hear them bells a ringing. I can hear the angels singing," she said. Soon after that, on March 10, 1913, she died. She was more than 90 years old. Harriet Tubman was a brave, courageous woman. She was admired and loved by the many people who knew her. She was a conductor on the railway to freedom, to Moses, and to her people. Okay, so get your biography paper sheets we've been working out. They're underneath your bin.